are talking The Wolf of Snow Hollow. This one written, directed and starring Jim Cummings, who plays our kind of central protagonist, the Deputy Sheriff John Marshall. And there's also the final feature-length film of the late great Robert Forrester, who plays his father and who is the kind of the sheriff, you know, inches away from retirement. And I would say this movie in some ways is the Jaws of the werewolf genre, because it actually has a story which is very reminded me a lot of Jaws. We have a small American town. This time it's a sort of snowy snow resort, you know, obviously compared to the Amityville beach. We have a local out of his depth police officer, in this case the deputy played by Cummings, and he is tasked to investigate a series of grisly killings that have all the hallmarks of an animal attack that of course happens on after a kind of full moon. The locals are blaming him. He's a kind of how he has his own personal demons, a estranged family. He has a drinking problem. His father, played by Robert Forrester, is won't kind of retire and has ill health. And the bodies start to mount up in a grisly fashion, and of course there may well be the something out there, maybe not of this world, killing things. So let's just talk about what works. I actually, for the most part, really enjoyed this film. The movie has a crisp and good production value. It really feels like Cummings is an assured director. And has a kind of somewhat distinct style in regards to some of his kind of like his camera work, his editing, things like that. And I quite liked him as a central protagonist as well. In fact, I liked all the cast here. I mean, Robert Forrester is the perfect actor to play a kind of a grizzled cop, and he does this, you know, fantastically in this movie, despite him not having a huge amount of screen time, but enough to be more of a, you know, a supporting role rather than just a cameo. But I also enjoyed his kind of like his female sort of subordinates, the surrounding cast as well, various kind of like small roles. I think everyone does a great job here, and this had this kind of central kind of mystery that kind of permeates this movie as we kind of going along. Well, what's going on? And obviously people are calling werewolf, but this deputy is determined that it's just a guy, not a werewolf or a wolf or anything like that. And the pressure is on, and I just really liked the kind of the flow of the film. The killings, although not gratuitous in regards to its gore, come across as particularly violent, especially when we see some of the aftermath and the kind of when we're told about how the bodies are dismembered and things like that. They seem particularly kind of gruesome, even for, you know, a quote-unquote werewolf attack. I feel the movie's werewolf attacks are handled very well as well. The actual kind of like effects work, shall we say, the kind of the costuming looks very good. I think it's shot well, never really showing too much, but enough to kind of keep you satisfied. So maybe what doesn't work, I have to say, this movie I was a little frustrated with, because it was so close to being an excellent film. But there's a few things here that for me let this film down. And let me talk about maybe more the subjective one first of all. For me, this is touted as a kind of horror comedy, but to me the comedy did not work in this film. Now, the subject matter is taken deadly seriously. There's gruesome murders, you know, it doesn't kind of make a joke of the people getting killed. And there are some dramatic moments as well, you know, when the police are kind of getting blamed, and people sort of saying, oh, you should have caught it by now. And it makes you realise maybe the pressures that people in the service face and things like this, and kind of the disrespect maybe that they would get from people who, you know, think it's an easy job and things like that. However, to me, it's undercut by some of the comedic elements here that seem strangely out of place. Now, I guess comedy and horror, you know, they've gone hand in hand for a long time, but I think it went a little bit too far in the comedy areas. And they just, you know, it could have had a few jokes in it, but it had sort of too many. And I think it was at the expense of the dramatic scenes and some of the horror scenes as well. Because it really undercut the kind of the spookiness, the fear factor, the level of danger. And then we do have jokes, and then we kind of go into a dramatic scene. It kind of undercuts, because you're having this kind of like this weird jokey tone that is so weirdly juxtaposed compared to the somewhat serious nature of the rest of the scenes. A couple of other things that I feel add to that kind of sense of discombobulation. There's some poor and odd editing choices here, and it mainly happens when there is a werewolf attack. So what the movie does is it kind of shows you, it splits up, so we have scenes that we're having the werewolf attack, and then it shows you intercut with those attacks the scenes from the next day when the police are discovering the bodies. And it's an odd choice by Cummings, I have to say, because it totally undercuts the actual attacks, unfortunately. I mean, they look great from what we see, but then they're kind of interspliced with sometimes comedic kind of reactions to the kind of the bodies and stuff like that, and it totally undercuts it. And the other thing as well, which I feel does exactly the same thing, is the music. Now, the music isn't bad, but it's used inappropriately, I would say. There's scenes here where the score that we have doesn't match the scenes that it's in, and also it kind of, you feel it drowns out some of the dialogue, and also just it kind of draws your attention away from what's happening on screen and makes you kind of notice the soundtrack a bit more. And to me, a good soundtrack is sometimes where it just pluses the scene, but to me this kind of overtook it in some circumstances. So unfortunately, as much as I was really liking this movie, it just kept, you know, making it so much that harder to enjoy. Now, that, to be fair, may be a thing that is more personal, but to me, I looking at how I think maybe general audiences will feel, I can see that these complaints being somewhat kind of universal. Now, without giving any spoilers away, I had to kind of mention the ending. I actually quite liked it. However, I can understand why people may be frustrated with it. So what I'm going to say, they make a choice, and like I've said, I actually think it works and is somewhat original. But it's not completely original. We have seen things like this before, but I can understand how people might be a little disappointed by it. It's all I'll say. So the movie, I enjoyed the film, but I really wanted to like it a lot more, because I felt it had it been treated more kind of dramatically, more seriously, less in the comedy, maybe kind of like dial back on the kind of the creative editing and maybe sort out the soundtrack a little bit, I feel this would have been a really good, memorable werewolf movie that people would be talking about when they're talking about their top 5 werewolf films. But as it stands, I don't think that is going to be the case. It's still an enjoyable film, and you know, it is flawed, but kind of good. You know, has elements here that I feel are really good, and it's a lot of that comes down from the cinematography, the cast. I actually thought the actual kind of like costuming and stuff like that looks good. So it's ultimately a flawed, good movie is the best way I would describe it. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. I really wanted to give it more because it had elements there to be so much better, but these things I just can't, you know, unfortunately it deflated the wheels off this thing, which it had started off with so well. So a 6 out of 10 for me, But still an enjoyable film, but I feel it sabotages its own creativity, I think, by having a mishmash of tones. Have you seen it? 6 out of 10. What did you think of it? Do you disagree with what I said? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.